The Forge diagnosis. My spouse, a respected doctor, has been subtly medicating me for a condition I've learned I don't actually have, and I have to uncover why. I am a 48-year-old architect, a man who built a career on precision. My world was once composed of clean lines and solid foundations. I could stand before a dozen skeptical investors and sell them a dream on a blueprint. I knew the exact tensile strength of steel and the perfect angle for morning light. This job is my entire identity, the very structure of my life. That is why the big presentation was not just a failure, it was a collapse. I stood at the head of a long oak table, my own designs projected behind me. These were good plans, maybe even my best work yet, but my mind, once my most reliable tool, was a swamp of thick fog. The numbers and specifications I had memorized simply evaporated into thin air. I looked at the expectant faces of the clients and saw only blurry, judgmental masks. My heart began to pound a frantic, irregular rhythm against my sternum. The air in the climate-controlled room felt thin, unbreathable. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence stretched until it was humiliatingly loud. It was the second time in a year this had happened. I had to excuse myself, mumbling something about being unwell. My wife, Ellie, was an anchor of calm when I finally made it home. She listened patiently as I recounted the disaster, her expression a perfect blend of sympathy and clinical concern. She reminded me that this was just the anxiety disorder asserting itself. She said my brain was an unreliable narrator and I should not listen to it. She has been a respected physician for 2 decades, so I believe her. She guided me to the sofa, her hands gentle on my shoulders. She brought me a glass of water and the small orange pill bottle. She told me to take my medication and let my mind settle down. I did as she said, because her certainty was the only solid thing left to hold on to. As I swallowed the small white tablet, she watched with a focused intensity. After, I twisted the bottle in my hands, a nervous habit. The edge of the top label from our local pharmacy was peeling slightly. Underneath, I saw a sliver of another label from a different chain pharmacy. It was from a town in a different state, a place we had not lived in for 6 years. I thought it was strange, but Ellie always reused things. It was probably nothing more than her being frugal. But the image of that old label stuck with me, a tiny, unsettling detail in an otherwise perfect picture of care. It is strange trying to remember the man I was just 5 years ago. He feels like a completely different person, a character from a movie. I used to have so much energy, a restless drive that fueled my work and my life. We would host dinner parties where I would hold court, debating politics or art until past midnight. Ellie was always the quieter one, observing with a small, knowing smile. She said she loved my passion, that it balanced her own calm and steady nature. We were a team, each providing something the other lacked. The first signs were subtle, easy to dismiss as middle age. I started feeling a bone-deep weariness that coffee could no longer fix. My focus at work began to drift, my sharp mind feeling dull and clouded. I told myself I was just burned out from a demanding project. Ellie was the first to give it a name, to call it anxiety. It felt like a relief to have an explanation for the growing fog in my head. She told me it was a common condition, a simple chemical imbalance. She said she could help me manage it with the right treatment. I put my health entirely in her hands because she was the expert. She picked up my prescriptions and organized them in a weekly pill container. She would remind me every night to take my medication. My world grew smaller, but I was told this was part of the healing process. I stopped going to social gatherings because they felt too overwhelming. I turned down challenging projects at work, preferring simpler, less demanding tasks. My old friends would call, and I would let the calls go to voicemail. Someone once told Ellie they were worried about me, that I had lost my spark. She later relayed this to me as proof of how sick I was. She said my friends could see how much I was struggling. I accepted her version of events without any questions. I believe my life was smaller because my illness required it to be. This was my new normal, a quiet, muted existence lived in the shadow of my diagnosis. It was a life curated by my loving, capable wife. The call came on a Tuesday morning for an emergency site visit. A subcontractor had made a critical error on a project 3 states away. I had to be on the next flight out to deal with the problem. I threw some clothes into a bag, my mind already racing with potential solutions. It was the first time in a long while that a work crisis had made me feel focused instead of terrified. In the frantic rush to get to the airport, I left my weekly pill organizer on the nightstand. I only realized my mistake when I was in my sterile hotel room that evening. A wave of pure panic washed over me, cold and overwhelming. Ellie had always told me that missing a dose was dangerous for my stability. I spent the night bracing for a complete mental breakdown. Sleep was a restless, shallow affair, and I woke up feeling raw and exposed, but the breakdown I expected never came. I went to breakfast in the hotel restaurant, my hands trembling slightly. Then something strange happened as I drank my black coffee. A bit of the persistent fog in my head seemed to thin out. It was like a blurry image slowly resolving into a sharper picture. At the construction site, the feeling of clarity intensified under the bright morning sun. The problem with the foundation was complex, involving misread blueprints and faulty materials. The old me would have been paralyzed by the pressure, but my mind was working again, connecting the dots with a speed I had forgotten. I saw the error, devised a solution, and clearly explained the new plan to the foreman. I was confident, articulate, and in complete control of my thoughts. I felt like I had woken up from a long and suffocating dream. The man I was in that moment was the man I used to be. For the first time in years, I felt entirely like myself again. That night, back in the hotel, the relief was replaced by a chilling suspicion. I was supposed to be a wreck without my medication. Instead, I had never felt better or more capable. The illusion I had been living under began to crack right down the middle. I started to seriously doubt the nature of my illness. Coming home felt like willingly stepping back into a cage I had just discovered. The clarity I experienced on the trip was a fragile, precious thing. I wanted to hold on to it, but I also felt a deep, nagging need to prove it was real. That evening, Ellie handed me my pill with her usual serene smile. I took it from her, a silent test for my own sanity. I needed to know if the fog was truly in the medication or just in my head. Within an hour, the familiar lethargy seeped back into my bones. The sharp edges of the world softened into a dull, manageable blur. The suspicion I had felt was now undeniable, a cold stone in my gut. The next day I tried to talk to her about my trip. I explained that I felt incredibly sharp and capable without the pills. I told her I solved a major crisis at work with ease. I chose my words carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. Ellie listened with a look of profound, patient concern on her face. She did not get angry. She got clinical. She explained that what I experienced was a common rebound effect. She said it was a temporary euphoria, a dangerous sign of my brain chemistry reacting to the sudden withdrawal. She told me that feeling too good could be a precursor to a severe crash. She used medical terms I did not understand, her voice calm and authoritative. She made my moment of clarity sound like a symptom of a deeper illness. She made me feel like an irresponsible child who had played with his own health. I felt foolish and ashamed for even questioning her expertise. She was the doctor, and I was just her sick, confused husband. The weight of her logic pressed down on me, suffocating my newfound certainty. I apologized for worrying her and promised to never miss a dose again, so I fell back into the routine, swallowing the pill every night. But this time, something was different. Underneath the artificial fog, a tiny cold spark of doubt refused to be extinguished. I was more confused than ever, caught between her reality and my own. I decided to conduct an experiment, a secret test of my own reality. Each night, I continued the ritual of taking my medication in front of Ellie. I would take the small pill and glass of water she offered me. But as I raised the glass to my lips, I would palm the tablet. It was a simple sleight of hand I had perfected in just a few days. Later, I would flush the chalky white pill down the toilet. The first few days were difficult as I had to feign the familiar sluggishness. I moved slower, spoke in a more deliberate and hazy way around her. It was exhausting to perform my own illness for my wife. But with each pill I discarded, the fog lifted more and more. My mind became my own again, a sharp and precise instrument. With this returning gaining clarity, I started to see the world around me differently. I saw the cracks in the foundation of the life we had built together. I began noticing how Ellie guarded her phone with a fierce, quiet intensity. She always kept it screened down on the counter or buried in her purse. One night, it buzzed with a message long after midnight. She claimed it was a late-night consult from the hospital. Her lie was smooth and practiced, but my clear mind caught the hesitation. Her late nights out, once explained as emergencies, now seemed suspect. I started checking our credit card statements online, something she had always managed. I found charges for dinners at expensive restaurants I had never been to. There were receipts from a boutique hotel in a part of town we never visit. Each discovery was another piece of evidence, another brick in a wall rising between us. I was no longer a sick man in a loving marriage. I was a clear-eyed stranger living with a woman I did not know at all. The truth was becoming a heavy, undeniable object, but I had not yet decided what I was going to do with it. The final piece I needed was the identity of the pill itself. Suspicions and credit card statements were not enough to confront this reality. I needed cold, undeniable proof to erase any lingering doubt. I waited for one of Ellie's late nights at the hospital. I had saved one of the small white tablets from the previous week. I held it in my palm, a tiny key to a terrible truth. I drove to a 24-hour pharmacy in a distant suburb. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh and unforgiving. I approached the counter with a story I had practiced in the car. I told the pharmacist I found the pill in my elderly father's coat pocket. I said I was worried he was mixing up his medications. I asked if he could identify it for me, and I offered to pay in cash. He looked at me with tired but professional eyes. He took the pill to a computer in the back. The wait felt like an eternity, each second stretching out with heavy tension. My heart pounded in my chest, a slow and steady drum of dread. The pharmacist returned with a printout and a serious expression. He told me the pill was definitely not a standard anti-anxiety medication. It was a potent sedative, sometimes used in clinical settings to calm agitated patients. He said its primary side effects were disorientation, memory impairment, and severe drowsiness. He looked at me with concern and suggested I speak with my father's doctor. I barely heard him as I paid and walked out of the store. The truth was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I was not being treated. I was being systematically subdued. Every fog, every forgotten word, every moment of weakness had been manufactured. It was not a sickness, it was a cage. That drive home was the beginning of a new, cold anger. My life with Ellie was not a lie. It was a crime scene. The drive home was quiet, the world outside my car windows strangely muted. The confirmation from the pharmacist had not brought rage, but a chilling and profound emptiness. It was the feeling of discovering that your entire house is built on a sinkhole. Every memory, every shared moment, every kind gesture from my wife was now tainted. They were not acts of love, but calculated moves in a long, quiet deception. When I walked through the front door, the house felt different. It was no longer a home, but a meticulously constructed stage set. The photos on the wall of us smiling on vacation felt like propaganda. Ellie was in the kitchen, and she greeted me with a warm, familiar smile. She asked how my day was, her voice full of the same gentle concern as always. Looking at her was like looking at a stranger wearing my wife's face. Every word she spoke was a lie, every touch a betrayal. I played my part, mumbling about being tired from work. I let her guide me to the sofa, her hand on my back. The gesture that once felt like comfort now felt like the touch of a handler. I was a specimen she was managing. The most profound consequence was the feeling of absolute crushing isolation. I could not tell anyone what I had discovered. Who would possibly believe my story over the word of a respected physician? They would see me as a paranoid man, my accusations just another symptom. I was completely and utterly alone with this monstrous truth. My love for her did not just die, it was erased. It was replaced by a cold, sharp-edged resolve. The man who had felt confused and guilty was gone forever. In his place was someone who was clear, focused, and preparing for a war no one else knew was coming. My world had not just shifted, it had been demolished. The desire for answers or explanations simply vanished from my mind. Understanding why she did this was a luxury I could no longer afford. My new focus was singular and cold. I was going to take my life back. The architect in me began to design a new kind of structure. It was not a building of steel and glass, but a meticulous plan for dismantling hers. My first step was to move from suspicion to surveillance. I needed evidence that was absolute, visual, and undeniable. I spent hours online at my office researching covert recording devices. I settled on a tiny camera, no bigger than a screw head, hidden inside a functional smoke detector. I had it delivered to my workplace to avoid any questions. I waited for the following Saturday morning, when Ellie always went to a 2-hour yoga class. Her predictability, once a comfort, had now become a strategic advantage. Installing the device in our bedroom ceiling was a tense focus task. My hands were steady, my movements precise, like I was installing a critical fixture. That room, a place of supposed intimacy, was now my observation post. My next target was her phone, the one she guarded so carefully. I started watching her hands whenever she unlocked it. After 2 days, I had the 6-digit passcode memorized. It was the anniversary of her father's death, a date chosen to project sentimentality. One night, while she slept a deep, untroubled sleep, I took the phone from her nightstand. I sat in the dark living room as her entire secret life downloaded onto a hard drive. Messages, call logs, photos, everything. I was no longer looking for peace. I was gathering ammunition. My actions were cold, calculated, and entirely outside my own moral code. But the man I used to be would not have survived this. The first time I watched the footage was the moment the last piece of the old me died. I sat in my office late at night, the city lights twinkling outside my window. On my laptop screen, I saw my bedroom, our bedroom, become a stage for her betrayal. I saw her with another man, a colleague from the hospital I had met at holiday parties. The visual of the affair was a gut punch, but it was the audio that truly destroyed me. The tiny microphone in the smoke detector picked up everything. I listened as they talked about me while lying in my bed. They laughed about how docile and manageable I had become lately. She referred to the sedatives as her little helpers for a peaceful home life. He told her she was a genius for finding such an elegant solution. They were not just having an affair, they were celebrating my diminishment. I was not a person to them, just an obstacle that she had cleverly neutralized. I scrolled through the text messages I had downloaded from her phone. They were filled with cruel jokes about my fogginess and my supposed anxiety attacks. In one message, she complained that my dose might be too high because I was becoming boring. The raw, casual cruelty of it all burned away any remaining thoughts of a simple divorce. This was not a betrayal that could be solved with lawyers and paperwork. I was now fully committed to a path of absolute destruction. There was no room for negotiation or mercy left inside me. The tension in my chest was no longer anxiety or fear, but a tightly coiled spring of cold, patient rage. I had all the evidence I needed, a complete record of her crimes. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the architect of its ending. The perfect stage for the final act was the hospital's annual charity gala. It was the biggest social event of the year for the city's medical community. Ellie was set to receive a humanitarian award for her compassionate patient care. She bought a new dress and talked for weeks about her acceptance speech. I played the role of the proud, supportive husband right up to the end. The week before the event, I edited the evidence into a short, brutal film. It started with footage of her and her lover in our bed. Then it cut to her text messages mocking my mental state. It ended with crystal clear audio of them laughing about the sedatives. On the night of the gala, I found the technician controlling the presentations. I told him I was Ellie's husband and that I had a surprise tribute from her family. I gave him a USB drive with my video on it. I said it needed to play right before she was called to the stage. He was a young man, eager to please, and he did not ask any questions. I sat next to her at our table, smiling as her colleagues congratulated her. When the time came, the lights dimmed and the presenter began his glowing introduction. He spoke of her integrity, her empathy, and her unwavering professional ethics. Then he announced the special video presentation. The screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. I did not stay to watch the show. As the first images of our bedroom appeared, I stood up from the table. I heard the first confused murmurs ripple through the silent ballroom. I heard the sharp collective intake of breath from hundreds of people. I walked out of the grand ballroom without looking back. This was not about finding peace or closure. It was simply the calculated demolition of a life. My work was finally done. I drove home from the gala and did not check my phone once. The device that had been my primary tool was now just a silent black rectangle. I did not search for news articles or look for reactions on social media. The fallout from the explosion I had triggered was of no interest to me. My only job was to press the button, and I had done it. I walked into the dark, quiet house that was no longer our home. Her things were still everywhere, objects that now felt like artifacts from a stranger's life. Over the next few days, I methodically packed her belongings into boxes. I worked with a calm, architectural precision, emptying closets and clearing shelves. I took down our wedding photos and the pictures from our travels. I did not feel anger or sadness, only a profound and unsettling emptiness. The silence in the house was absolute, a heavy blanket over everything. The fog in my head was completely gone, leaving behind a sterile, empty clarity. I had won, but there was no sense of victory. I had exposed the truth, but there was no feeling of justice. The intense focus that had driven me for weeks had now vanished. It left a vacuum in its place, and there was nothing to fill it. I had meticulously designed and executed the demolition of my own life. All the lies are gone now, but so is everything else. I am a free man living in a perfectly silent, empty house. My mind is finally clear, but there is nothing left to see. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.